So when it comes to vegetation and creating, for example, large forest, one software that I really love is SpeedTree, but even more than the software, I really like their online library of assets. I think the quality of those trees is really amazing and you can do stuff that is extremely photoreal. So what I'm going to do is go on their library here and buy one of those packs. It's frankly not that expensive for the quality that you get. And once I've downloaded my assets and extracted them somewhere on my computer, I'm going to open one of those trees here in the software, SpeedTree. So just open the file. Cool, so there you have it. And if you want to, you can tweak them a little bit. I don't think I need to tweak them at all for what I need here. It's pretty much exactly what I want. You can change the size of the textures, you can tweak them, and you could also change the shape of the tree if you wanted. But all I want to do really at this point is export the mesh. So I'm going to go to File, Export Mesh, and I'm going to save this somewhere as an FBX. So here, I think we can leave most of the options by default. I'm just going to group by material. It's going to be easier. Yeah, you can choose JPEG for the textures, and I'm not going to choose also a texture size that is too big for those leaves. It makes no sense to work with 8K textures. Okay, so back in Maya, I can go ahead and import my mesh. Those assets, by the way, can be quite heavy. So once again, if you have like a machine that is not amazing, maybe try to export the lower res version of the mesh. Here I have, I think, the medium version, so it's reasonably high res, but not too much, and I don't need it to be too high res. So let's see how this looks. So obviously this looks all wrong, and I gotta warn you guys, this is a part that's gonna be a bit tedious, but what I will have to do is to rebuild all those shaders properly. Because the way to do leaf shaders in Redshift is to use sprite materials. But first, let's start with this bark material. If you remember, it's gonna be the same process as I did to convert those kitbash 3D elements. So I'm just gonna copy paste the name of the shader. Yep, I'm gonna copy it. Then I'm gonna convert the material from Func to Redshift material. Here it's just for the trunk, the bark, so it can be a standard Redshift material. I'm gonna paste back the name and replug the map. It's a pretty simple shader here, just a diffuse map and the bump map. Then you can also tweak a little bit the roughness according to what you want. And what I want to do actually is to check if there's a roughness map that comes with this asset, because there might be one, it's just that it's not plugged yet into the shader by default for some reason. Okay, so if I launch the IPR, it's looking fine for now. So one thing I also just did is to delete the history. It's something you want to do every once in a while, just to keep your scene as light as possible once again. So here I'm diminishing a little bit the IOR to have something a bit more natural for wood. So it can be something like 144, 145. Okay, so there's actually a gloss map, as you can see. So what I'm gonna do is use a reverse node, because as I said, a gloss map is actually a roughness map inverted. So we're gonna use the gloss map that comes with this asset, and we're gonna put it in a reverse node. So let me quickly do this. Type in a reverse node. So a reverse node is a utility node that is inside of Maya. So it's not in Redshift, it's a default Maya node, and it's just gonna invert whatever you put in it, whether it's like color map, alpha, whatever. So if I plug in here my gloss map, it's gonna become a roughness map, and you can then plug that into the roughness slot. Okay, so for leaves, it's gonna be slightly more complicated. Once again, I'm copying my leaf shader name, I'm showing it in my graph, and I'm gonna convert this first to a standard Redshift material for now. Same, so I replug the map. However, what I don't want to do is use the opacity map in the opacity slot of the Redshift standard material. I will explain that in a minute. We will actually not plug in the opacity in the opacity slot, but instead we will put our standard Redshift material inside of a Redshift sprite material. And then we will use the opacity map in the stencil slot. So let me type in here once again a reverse node to reverse the gloss map, so I have a roughness. There you go. Input and output, you can choose whatever, XYZ, doesn't matter. because it's a black and white image anyway. Cool. So now our basic shader is rebuilt. And now I just type in the Redshift sprite material. So this is actually the shader that you want to apply to your leaf. And inside that material, you're going to put your standout Redshift material. And in the stencil slot, that is where you will plug in the opacity map like I'm doing here. So it's called image stencil, as you can see. And so there you can plug in the opacity map. So that's basically how you rebuild your leaf shaders. And I completely understand that it might be tedious, it's going to take a while. So here by default also, I don't have the sprite material assigned to my leaf, so I'm going to go ahead and assign it to it. Obviously there are a lot of shaders here, so what I can do is just right click on the other shader, select, then assign to selected. There you go, and now it should look fine, and I think it does. So what you're gonna want to do is now to repeat this process for every shader of the tree. So as I said, this might be a really tedious and lengthy process. I would say that at this point, if you're not quite sure how many trees you need, if you need any trees, by the way, because you might do something that doesn't require trees, then maybe just rebuild one tree for the moment and see how that goes. In my case, I know that I want like a pretty big forest, so obviously I need to have a lot of variation. So I'm gonna have to rebuild the shaders for my like 5 or 6 tree assets I think that I have. Now the good thing though is that once that is done, you can store that into a library and you can reuse that later on. So here I'm doing the same for another tree. I've already done this one. And as you can see, it really looks quite photoreal. And especially in our shot with the motion blur, the fly through in the valley, it's gonna look really awesome, I think. Now, one word about how to use this. What you don't want to do is to export this as a mesh. What you really want to do is save your scene, but then export the selection as a Redshift proxy. And that is gonna allow us to keep our scene super light, because essentially what we will have in the viewport is only a cube, but we will have the tree showing up at render. So if I now import the proxy that I just exported, you will see that the geometry is actually not there. I only have a cube, but it is linked to my original geometry. And as you can see, it does show up at the render. So take the time to prepare all your assets, export them as proxy, and then the next thing we can do is see how we can create a forest out of those assets.